Ladies and gentlemen, let's Gamer video. We're going to be going through some of the technology and gaming related happenings over the last few days because there have been some interesting developments. Now, first things first, we're going to start out with Intel regarding the release schedule for Cannonlake, and then we're going to move over to Camp Microsoft with Gears of War 4 because the developers are boasting regarding the visual fidelity they're managing to wrangle out of the Xbox One. And then finally we're going to visit Camp Nintendo regarding the launch window of the NX, the next generation console from them. So I guess we might as well start out with Intel. So the 10nm Cannonlake launch has been subject of a lot of wild speculation. Specifically, there was a rumour not too long ago that the Cannonlake launch was going to be postponed to some point in 2018. Primarily this is down to delays regarding the production and the shrinking down to the 10nm process. However, supposedly this is not the case. Intel have confirmed to Motley Fool that no, this is not happening. We're going to remain on schedule for the first generation of 10nm Intel products in the second half of 2017. Essentially, yes, there are some problems. There have been some slippages, if you will. For example, 2013 was the original date that we had hoped to see the introduction of 14nm. However, it turned out to be 2014, so 2013 to 2014. 10nm was originally supposed to be 2015, but it slipped about 2 years into the future. And then we won't see 7nm until 2020, which is quite some time to say the least. Boiling it all down, as many of you are aware, back in the day, the golden era of silicon, if you will, it used to be a cadence of about 2 years when we had a tick-tock, it was as regular as a clock. Essentially every couple of years we knew that we'd be moving on to a completely new architecture and everything was rosy, everything was absolutely coming up daisies. Unfortunately, it's now turned to about 2.5 years, maybe slightly more, depending. And so now Intel have essentially have to go for what it is, I guess you could say, a semi-talk. That's what many people are nicknaming it anyway. What this means for Intel is that we're going to see the introduction of Kabylake. Now, many of you are probably aware what Kabylake is, but I'll just give you a quick refresher. Kabylake is essentially Skylake on, well, steroids. We'll be seeing improvements in the overall architecture, and it's not going to be a revelation. If you've got Skylake, you may not be particularly bothered about Kabylake, but it's going to have the usual, it's a little bit nicer, it's a little bit faster, it's a little bit shinier, and that's about it. The real nugget, the real golden nugget, unfortunately, is going to be Cannonlake, but once again, while that is the first 10nm product, it will once again be delayed until 2017, which is a bit later than normal, but nowhere near the massive delay that we'd expected until 2018. After that, of course, we'll move to the 7nm process and then theoretically the 5nm process. Now that's assuming that they manage to continue to do this, because we all know that, you know, it's getting a little tricky to squeeze this out of the silicon. Intel do have a bit of a thing for lakes, because after we have those lakes, we're going to then move on to Ice Lake, and then finally Tiger Lake. Now Tiger Lake is probably going to be 2019/2020. Your guess is as good as mine whether there's going to be a slippage. Unfortunately, this is just how things are at the moment. So what does this mean for those of you who are looking to buy a processor in 2016, in other words this year, not wait until late 2017? It really means that you're going to have a choice between Kabylake and, well, Zen. It's unknown which one's going to launch first and which one's going to offer the best value for money. For example, it could be that Kabylake offers a very similar number of cores versus hyperthreading versus cache versus blah to what we already have with Skylake, but it might be that let's say Zen, which will have a higher number of cores available for the top-end models, may cost equivalently more money. So it could be that like-for-like cash, you still may be better off, or roughly the same with Intel's products. Unfortunately, we just don't know what the positioning of AMD's products are. From what we've heard, and once again, that this is basically speculation and murmurings, this is not fact, but from what we can probably guess, AMD don't want the top-end processor from themselves, whatever that ends up being called, the top-end Zen, which has 8 cores and obviously the equivalent of hyper-threading, SMMT, simultaneous multi-threading. From what we can understand, it will cost equivalently of maybe the top-end Skylake, but obviously, essentially, we don't really know at the moment. AMD have traditionally wanted to have the core advantage over Intel, and I could understand them wanting to undercut price-wise versus offer more cores because they want to gain back some market share. I would be okay with that because it's just good for us as customers at the end of the day, and it would be interesting to see how Intel would respond. If they would at all, they may just say, hey, bollocks to it, we're just happy for the next couple of months to have AMD chip away at us a little bit. It doesn't really matter because we can hit back, but then by the which point we may see Zen Plus ready to take on Canon. We just don't really know. So, what about Gears of War? Now, I've got to be honest, Gears of War, when I first played it way back about 10 years ago on the Xbox, the original Xbox 360. I don't really need to say original Xbox 360, do I? Anyway, when I originally played it, I thought to myself, holy crap, this game looks good, and it still holds up today fairly well. However, in an interview with the official Xbox magazine, this is in the United States, not the United Kingdom, the studio head of Coaltion Studios said, his name actually would probably be handy for you all, Rod Ferguson. Let me say that again, Rod Ferguson. God damn it, I'm having one of those days. Anyway, according to Ferguson, he believes that 60 FPS is the way forward. And I'll quote, delivering with the Ultimate Edition, he's referring to Gears of War, the first 60 FPS multiplayer experience in the franchise history, really taught us a lot of what it is to have a 60 FPS culture on the team, and we're really leveraging that experience with Gears of War 4. He then also says, and I quote, just how the original Gears of War was a visual showcase for the Xbox 360, Gears of War 4 will be a showcase for the Xbox One. Now, we have seen some footage of Gears of War 4 and it does look kinda sweet. We don't know whether, of course, it's going to be on the PC. There are some rumours that it will, but until we see an actual physical version of it, running on a PC, I'm just going to go ahead and say it's an Xbox One exclusive, regardless of the fact it looks pretty darn impressive. As an interesting tidbit, it's not super secret information or anything like that, but the original release of Gears of War, well, rather the prototype, the demo of Gears of War, when it was actually being in development and Epic were working on it, true story, the Xbox 360 was only going to have 256 megabytes of memory. Yes, it's true. Essentially, the developers shown Microsoft the footage and said, this is what it's going to look like with 512, this is what it's going to look like with 256. You choose how much memory you get in your system. And now, of course, we can all thank God that there was 512 megabytes in the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, because in my opinion, 256 would have probably cut the console generation lifespan down quite significantly. I mean, could you imagine only 256 megabytes of memory? Just to put that into perspective, the Xbox original, you can no longer say the Xbox One, can you? That's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, the original Xbox only actually had 64 megabytes of memory, which is, well, a lot for back then. And for a further little tidbit of information, the GPU inside the Xbox original was actually really darn powerful. It was actually the equivalent of some of the very high-end desktop graphics cards upon release. It was the equivalent of around There were slight architectural differences, but around the GeForce 3 Ti 500, which was an incredibly expensive GPU at the time. The primary difference was the original Xbox did not have enough memory bandwidth. It was only using 200 MHz DDR memory, so it had a little bit of bandwidth limitation on it, despite the fact it had an abundance of memory. And there you go, that's a bit of random information for you. Anywho, what about the NX? So, there are a lot of conflicting reports regarding the NX, but none more so than the release date. A lot of gamers are assuming it's going to be this year, however there are also quite a few bets that it's going to slip to 2017 because we haven't really heard that many rumours concerning the actual physical hardware yet. In fact, I've got to say, Nintendo are doing pretty darn good at actually holding back the hype train yet, because when you consider the number of users who are actually working this damn thing. Anyway, as I said, not much is known about the hardware. We do know that it could be a full console, it could be a hybrid console, or it could just be a handheld console. There's just not enough. Supposedly there are some reports that it could be a mixture of everything, we just don't know yet. However, supposedly there is a source who has been working on the NX, and they are telling anyone who will listen that the Nintendo NX is going to be released this year, and Zelda NX is going to be at the launch window release. So in other words, obviously launch window is down to interpretation. To some, launch window could be, say, 2 to 3 months. To others, it could be a week. So your guess is as good as mine. Wouldn't be surprised if we see this around October, November. I don't think we're going to see the system launched in December. Wait, just watch, it'll be launched December now, just to prove me a liar. The reason I don't think that is traditionally consoles are launched a little earlier to give people A, time to obviously buy it, and B, obviously retailers typically start closing shop, where it becomes a little more tricky. So technically, it would make sense early in December time. I wouldn't be surprised. Then again, for all we know, it could be bloody a secret launch and launched in like August. Look what happened with the Sega Saturn. Many assumed it was going to be released in one date, and it actually turned out that it was released quite earlier than what people anticipated. Basically, Sega rushed the launch, got it into retail shelves. There wasn't any advertising. It was a bit of a disaster. So while I'm not advocating that's what happens, I wouldn't be surprised if, you know, we don't really know the state of the hardware, essentially. We can only make some guesses. Must admit, I'm not the world's biggest Nintendo fan, as many of you are aware. But I'm curious to see what they've done. And I kinda hope it's a slap to both Microsoft and Sony. Not because I dislike either company, but I think it would do the market good to have a bit of a shake-up. Just to say, hey, Nintendo are a threat, you guys need to step up your game, and you can't just keep having this status quo where one of you does one thing and the other one will do something else kind of similar. I'd like to see a little bit of a shake-up just to see what happens. And in a way, and I'm not comparing this to this at all, but remember when the 16-bit era was going along, and Sega and Nintendo at the time, yeah, Nintendo was certainly ahead, without a question. They were definitely ahead of Sega, but Sega did gain a lot of ground with the 16-bit era, especially in certain regions. For example, the PAL region, if memory serves, I believe it was PAL. Sega got a lot of sales, and they pinched a lot of Nintendo's market share. This is particularly true in the early days of like Sonic 1 and 2, and Nintendo did start to gain ground later on in the system's lifespan. My point being, however, that Sega and Nintendo, there was massive fierce rivalry between both of them, but I think neither company, from what I've heard like through the grapevine, neither company really expected another player to just go in and bitch slap them, and it did. Like when Sony came in, yeah, Nintendo did okay with the 64, it was kind of expensive and it did have some design flaws, and the Saturn also is a powerhouse, so it does have some die-hard fans, including myself. I loved the Saturn, but it's hard to disagree that Sony just kind of slacked the industry, and I'm not saying Nintendo will do the same with the NX because it's a very different situation, but I'm just saying that kind of shake-up, a little bit of shake-up, I think would be good for the industry, and it will just be interesting to see not only how studio heads react, but also how we as gamers respond. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.